Would you like to buy a home in Italy without wasting time and losing thousands of dollars? In this video, you'll discover the 7 most common mistakes foreign buyers make, how to avoid them, and how to protect yourself from scams with written safeguards and practical strategies that I'll show you in just a few minutes. Whether it's your first home, a vacation property, or a rental investment, here you'll find the right tips to handle the purchase safely. The first mistake is house hunting without really knowing the area. It's easy to fall in love with a town or village while on vacation, but the reality of a place goes far beyond its surface beauty, and a quick visit isn't enough to understand if it truly meets your needs. The risk is realizing too late that living there is complicated, maybe because of the lack of essential services or other issues you didn't notice during your short stay. To evaluate an area, I suggest looking at 3 main categories. First, practical day-to-day aspects, such as essential services, transportation and roads, parking availability, and how easy it is to get around. Next, quality of life, including noise levels, safety, green areas and outdoor spaces, and the kind of neighborhood you'll be living in. Finally, environmental factors like pollution, natural risks, and climate conditions. Of course, the perfect area doesn't exist. Every place has pros and cons. What matters is finding the one that fits your personal and family needs. In my opinion, one of the best ways to reduce risks is to rent in the area first. That way you can test it without commitments or major expenses like buying. You'll get a feel for daily life, and if the place doesn't work for you, well, it's much easier to move. The second mistake is underestimating purchase costs. The purchase price is the main cost, but not the only one. There are additional expenses that can significantly affect the total. I'll make a dedicated video on this topic, analyzing every single expense in detail. For now, plan on about 10% more than the property's price to cover these costs. For example, if the home costs 200,000 euros, expect around 20,000 euros in additional expenses. Naturally, there are exceptions. Sometimes costs are between 7 and 9%, and in other cases they can go over 10%. For now, using 10% as a rule of thumb will help you keep your budget realistic. The third mistake is house hunting without knowing the local market prices. Understanding real estate values gives you an edge when negotiating. Without this information, you risk overpaying, maybe for a property the owner has struggled to sell. As you can imagine, asking the real estate agent is not the solution. Most of the time, they'll say the price is in line with the market. So, what can you do? There are 2 methods to estimate market value. The first is analyzing listings. Here's how. Go to 𝗦𝗨𝗕𝗦𝗖𝗥𝗜𝗕𝗙 and Gateway, 2 excellent Italian listing sites. Select at least 5 properties in the area you're interested in that are similar in size, type, and condition, matching what you're looking for and fitting your budget. Compare the descriptions, features, strengths, and weaknesses. Pay attention to whether the more expensive ones have something that justifies the higher price, like a large terrace, a garden, or an extra bathroom. If 5 similar properties are all within a certain price range, that's probably the market value. For a more accurate estimate, check between 5 and 10 listings. The more data you have, the more reliable your conclusion will be. This method works best in areas with an active market and plenty of listings, but it may be less useful in isolated areas with fewer properties. The second method is using the quotazioni immobiliari section on 𝗦𝗨𝗚𝗚𝗘𝗦𝗧𝗘𝗗, available in English and other languages. There, you'll find market values for the area you're interested in, as well as for other Italian towns, often broken down by neighborhood. You'll also see price trend graphs from recent years, plus regional market data for both sales and rentals. The numbers come from several sources, including the Italian Real Estate Observatory, which publishes official reference values every 6 months. These are indicative values, but they're a solid starting point to get oriented. With these two methods, you'll get a clearer idea of market values, so you can approach your search and your negotiations with more confidence. The fourth mistake is not learning in advance how the buying process works. Every country has its own rules, and Italy has required steps that may be very different from what you're used to. Not knowing them means risking poor decisions. The Italian buying process has 3 stages. The first is the purchase offer. Once you've found the property, you'll need to make an offer, basically telling the seller, "Hey, I'm interested in buying your house." Most of the time, the offer is in writing, especially if there's an agency involved. But in some cases, it can be verbal. The second stage is the preliminary agreement. After the seller accepts your offer, you move on to the signing of the preliminary sales agreement, in Italian preliminare or compromesso. It's a contract between you and the seller, in which you both commit to completing a future final contract. When signing the preliminary agreement, you will have to pay a deposit, in Italian 𝗦𝗑𝗕𝗦 confermatoria, a sum of money that is used to prove your serious intention to purchase the property, and is a guarantee for both parties. The average amount of the deposit ranges from about 10% to 30% on the purchase price. The third and final stage is the deed of sale. In Italy, the definitive contract is a public act called rogito notarile, and it's always drawn up and signed in front of a notary, when both buyer and seller are ready to close the deal. On the day of the deed of sale, you'll pay the purchase price, the taxes, and the notary fee, who, as a buyer, you get to choose. For a full breakdown of the process, check out my dedicated video, linked in the description. The fifth mistake is getting tricked by the real estate agent. Real estate agents don't always have the best reputation in Italy, but fortunately there are plenty of good professionals out there. The key is knowing how to recognize them. But how? First, make sure you're dealing with a licensed agent and not someone working illegally, which unfortunately does happen. In Italy, all real estate agents must be registered in the REA, which is the official register of businesses and professionals authorized for activities like real estate brokerage. Registration proves the agent has passed the required exams and meets the legal requirement to practice. You can check their license by asking for a copy of the REA registration or by using the site 𝗧𝗛𝗏𝗧.it, only available in Italian. From the homepage, click Professionisti, Agenzie e Agenti Immobiliari. Then enter the agent's or agency's name to confirm they're listed. Remember, an unlicensed agent has no right to a commission. Typically, commissions range from 2% to 5% of the sale price, depending on the agent. For example, on a 200,000 property, the minimum commission is around 4,000 euros, plus 22% VAT. There are exceptions. For cheaper properties, under 100,000 euros, the percentage might be higher. In other cases, it depends on the agent's discretion. In general, this range is the most common. The commission is paid by both the buyer and the seller, either at the preliminary agreement or at the deed of sale, depending on the agent. The sixth mistake is neglecting due diligence before buying. In the Italian market, it's quite common to come across properties with building irregularities that only come to light during the sale and must be fixed by the seller. It may sound strange, but neither the agent nor the notary is required to check a property's compliance with building codes. That said, many professionals do carry out preliminary checks, and if they found issues, they alert both seller and buyer, so the problem can be fixed before closing. To protect yourself, there are two options. The first is adding a safeguard clause in both the purchase offer and the preliminary agreement. Here is a typical example from an Italian preliminary agreement. In short, the seller declares they are the rightful owner and that at the time of the deed of sale, the property will be transferred free of mortgage of liens, compliant with building and zoning laws, and in full legal order. Also, any condominium fees already approved will be covered by the seller before closing. Of course, this only applies to apartments in a condominium. If you plan to buy with mortgage, I strongly recommend including a clause in your offer, making the purchase conditional on loan approval. This way, if the bank denies your mortgage, you won't be forced to buy or compensate the seller. The second safeguard is hiring, at your own expense, a qualified professional, such as a surveyor, to prepare a technical report on the property before the purchase. Their job is to verify compliance with zoning, land registry, and building regulations, as well as to check for any environmental, historical, or landscape restrictions, which are common in certain parts of Italy. In short, the technical report provides an additional level of security for the buyer. The seventh mistake is underestimating the time it takes to complete the purchase. Italy is the land of bureaucracy, and a real estate transaction usually takes at least a couple of months. But that's only in ideal cases. When the property is fully compliant, vacant, you already have all the documents ready for the preliminary agreement and deed, and you don't need a mortgage. To speed up the process, you'll also need an efficient and responsive agent, which isn't always granted. In most cases, the process takes longer, so plan on at least 3-4 months. It can even stretch to 6 months in more complex situations. For example, if the house is occupied and the seller still needs to move elsewhere. So, to recap, these are the 7 mistakes to avoid when buying a home in Italy. Before wrapping up, 2 quick things. First, check the descriptions for a link to my video on how to find your dream Italian home online in just a few minutes, thanks to some of the best real estate websites. Second, I'd love a small favor. Creating this content took a lot of work. If you found the video helpful, drop a like, share it, and subscribe to the channel with notification turned on. If you have questions or something wasn't clear, leave a comment below. See you soon!